An old house is so full of warmth, charm, character, and delight, but it can also be rife with some other challenges with their electrical and the plumbing. Let's take a close look at the 15 things you want to consider before buying an old house. My name is Andrew Finney, and my passion is helping you make sense of real estate. If you need help finding a top agent near you, or if you simply want to drop me a line to say hello, my contact info is below. If you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel now and like this video. Thank you. All right, my friend, let's take a closer look at this because it is pretty easy to get wooed by the character and the charm of an older house, yet there are some things that we should know as we move forward in considering if it's the right option for us. The first thing to consider are the age of the windows will affect your utility bills. In fact, it's one of the biggest draws about new construction is the fact that they are being built to the most energy efficient specs as of right now. So when we're looking at an older home, we need to assess how old are these windows and what impact are they going to have on our utility bills. It might be something that you want to consider replacing moving into the future, or at least ways be prepared for the higher utility bills, whether it be heating or cooling. Something to think about, something to consider. The second thing to think about is that leveling out the floors could constitute an entire renovation project. Think about as a home settles over time, depending on how old this home is, the floors may have began to slope. If they're sloping, then it would occur to us, hey, you know what? We can just level out the floors. But whenever you get into it and you start looking at that project, you might have to go back and put in new support structures underneath the flooring to be able to level it out, which would constitute a full-on renovation project. So if the floors are sloped in the house that you're looking at, consider what it would cost if you want to go ahead and level it out so that you're walking even. The third thing to think about is that exposing the original features could make the house a lot noisier. Let's face it, some of the charm of that old house is probably what lies underneath what people have done to that house over the decades and over the centuries. You might be thinking there has to be some exceptionally gorgeous beams that we could expose if we just took the ceiling down. While doing that, you could also be removing insulation and sound barriers that help to keep your house quiet. It's something you want to take a closer look at and make plans for if that's what's on your mind. The fourth thing to think about is there might be a dry well that your plumbing is feeding into. That's because with older homes, they often ran the plumbing into a dry well to dispose of the wastewater and the gray water leaving the house. You want to know for certain, where is that going? Is it going to be tied into the municipality, or is it going to a dry well? This is something that a plumbing inspector would be able to share more information with you about during your closing process in the due diligence phase. For reference, dry wells are no longer allowed. They're not legal anywhere in the United States with more recent construction in the homes. This is because depending on where the dry well is located, it could cause basement flooding in your house. The fifth thing is that you might want to consider adding additional outlets or having a lot of power strips. That's because a lot of these older homes weren't designed for electricity. Think about whenever Thomas Edison created the light bulb, and then we started seeing the use of, at the time, AC and DC electric into homes. A lot of the older homes were being retrofitted. Well, it wasn't until recently in modern history whenever we started consuming huge amounts of electricity from our computers to our devices to our smart televisions to everything we have going on in our home. It's important to make a special note of this and chat it over with your home inspector, and you might want to consider having an electrical inspection done as well to ensure that the electrical panel can handle the additional electric in the house or if it should be retrofitted. And while you're doing that, you might want to consider adding additional outlets. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a huge amount of power strips. Either way, be prepared for the reality that you might need to do some electrical work on your old house. The sixth thing to consider is not to count on symmetrical balance of a home. When we're talking about a symmetrical balance of a home, when we go into a lot of homes, they might be 20, 30, 40 years old, we can expect symmetry and design in the architectural and style of that property, meaning that all the walls are flat. Now, when you start going back to like around the World War II era homes, the 1940s, 1950s, the 1930s, if we're going back even later, it was a concept back then to have some wavy walls. So if you have a wavy wall, how are you going to hang a nice square picture on it? It's going to be a little bit of a problem, isn't it? So it's one of those things to be realistic about, and it adds to the charm and the luster and appeal of an older home. They're completely unique compared to the way the architectural styles are today. You're definitely going to have a lot of character and a lot of charm, but you're going to need a little workaround with your interior design. The seventh thing to consider are creaky floorboards. Now, initially you might think, hey, you know what, that creaky floorboard is kind of cool. It delights me. It lets me know that this house is real. It's authentic. Well, they probably won't be so charming forever. At some point, you might be wanting to consider replacing the creaky floorboards. So that's that's another expense you might want to look at. That being said, old homes offer so much. It's really up to you to make sure if this is right for you or not. But considering the things that we're talking about right now will help you understand what is going on with a lot of old homes and the things in the projects that you might want to consider. The 8th thing to think about are that the pipes could hold surprises. Now, when we're talking about the pipes, obviously we're talking about the plumbing of the house itself. Depending on how old those pipes are, you might have rust, but in addition to the rust, you may also have high levels of sulfur. It's a really wise idea when buying an old home, especially the older it gets, to have a plumbing inspection done to ensure you know what kind of piping is in the house and the plan for replacing the piping if it's necessary moving forward with buying your old house. This could either be something that you're preparing for now, or it could be a disqualifier for you for that specific property. Either way, get the information and the intel up front about what's going on with those pipes so you don't have a pain in the pipe. The 9th thing to think about is that you won't have a modern floor plan or layout designed to the property. Now, we know that about since 2005, 2007, people have been trending and leaning towards more of the open concept design homes. Well, in an older home, you're not going to have that, and there might be structural supporting walls that are going to make it very difficult, if not impossible, to blow out the walls to create that open concept. Now, this is a couple of different things. Now, this is going back into the way that people lived at the time that home was constructed, and you might find your way around it after getting used to it and acclimated. You might find that you absolutely adore and love it. Or perhaps it was the reason why you wanted to see the house to begin with. Either way, just realize that removing walls or restructuring the layout of the property might be an option, but it also might not be an option. You'll need to review that with a structural engineer when you consider that renovation project if that's something on your mind. Either way, just know there are no modern designs in old homes. The 10th thing to think about is not banking on a diamond in the rough. When we're talking about the diamond in the rough when it comes to an old home, it goes back to what we were talking about a moment ago. Sometimes people look at an old home and they say, you know what, there's got to be absolutely stunning natural wood floors underneath this linoleum or tile or carpet that might be going on, or there has to be beautiful beams that could be exposed by taking the ceiling back. Well, here's the thing. That home is however old that it is. If it was built in like 1750, right? That means that home would be 269 years old. How many renovation projects do you think happened in the last 269 years in that home that was built in 1750? Probably quite a bit. That home has quite the history on it. So you might get lucky and get that diamond in the rough, or you might not. It's important not to bank on the thought that it's there because we don't know what happened in the previous decades, the previous centuries during that home's life. The 11th thing to think about is that old insulation methods aren't up to par. In fact, a lot of the insulation methods used back in the day were like straw when it was really old, and then mud, clay, and straw, and then it moved into like having newspaper, and then it moved into fiberglass to where we are today, where it's mainly foam that's going into the walls, or still in some cases fiberglass depending on the builder that you're working with. It's important to note that that also might be something that you decide to upgrade at some point in the future with the insulation. Obviously, the insulation is going to help cut back on our utility bills by keeping our warm air in and our cool air in depending on the season that you're running your HVAC system. So it's something to think about and it's something to know about. It might be an upgrade to consider. The 12th thing to consider is you might have to replace that beautiful old doorknob on the front door. Let's think about this for a moment. Why would we have to do that? Because that old doorknob that's on that door and those old locks within that house are just that. They're old. They're going to be a little bit clunky. They're going to be a little bit cumbersome, and they're going to be extremely easy for a savvy thief to be able to pick the lock. You might want to go ahead and change them out with a quick set or change them out to a lock of your choice to modernize the lock and further secure your house. And leave the ones inside the house that you like that you maybe don't use that often or aren't necessary for your home security purposes. The 13th thing to consider is that you might need to redo the electrical system inside the house. Now, a lot of these older homes do have some absolutely beautiful, phenomenal sconces and different types of lighting that we just don't see today, and those fixtures can actually fetch thousands of dollars each in some cases where they're ornately detailed. They're just stunning. I mean, let's just be honest, they're absolutely gorgeous. At the same time, that electrical being ran to it. Remember back when we were going into our conversation with Thomas Edison, the invention of the light bulb, electrical becoming more commonplace in homes? Well, consider the fact that in the 1920s, when they were running electrical inside of homes, they used copper insulated wires. Copper, of all things, which we know to be highly conducive to electrical current. So if you get an electrical contractor in there to do some rewiring, and they're like, hey, this home probably should have burned down to the ground a long time ago because of this copper insulated wire. It's a wonder that it hasn't. Then that's going to be your opportunity to upgrade electrical. So far, we have identified several systems that might need to be upgraded. It really just depends on how many people have renovated that home over the years and what projects they undertook. The 14th thing to think about is that you might have Nocturnal pets. With your nocturnal pets, you might have bats that are in the attic, you could have rats in the home, you could have squirrels taking up residence. There's a lot of different kind of critters that may have thought, hey, you know what? This is a lovely home. I want to make it my habitat too and try to share it with the humans that live below or above if they're in the basement, right? So you might need to have a pest inspection done on this property to ensure that ideally, unless you want to live with them, and if you do, that's cool, but most of us would probably prefer to have nocturnal pets outside in nature where they belong. So when we're looking inside the house, it's something to think about and something to be real about, because with nocturnal pets could also come their feces, and some of those feces make us people extremely sick. So a pest inspection will be extremely wise when you're considering an old home. The 15th thing to consider is that there could be ghosts inside the home. The older that home gets, going back into the early 1900s, 1800s, or even 1700s, we could expect that there has probably been a death inside that house at some point, and there may be a soul that hasn't been released from that property just yet. Depending on your point of view and your thought process regarding this will ultimately influence your decision whether this is a good thing, bad thing, or if it's just hocus pocus altogether, or if you should just call in a sage to help them find their way home. Either way, it's something that you might experience. Now, people that have lived in houses that have found out that people have died in the properties have certainly at times said they believe the house to be haunted, or they would hear noises they couldn't explain. I'm not trying to freak you out here, but it is a real thing. I mean, it just depends on where your thoughts are about the supernatural. All the same, you could have a ghoul or a ghost as a roommate. All right, so now let's talk about 7 nightmares to avoid buying an old house and 17 types of home inspections a buyer can do. Looking forward to our next conversation. We'll see you in a few.